In his world it was kindness. In hers, it was a debt that bound them both. The horse snorted as Jake pulled the reins hard, his eyes fixed on the thin trail of smoke rising from the chimney of what was supposed to be his new home. The lawyer in Santa Fe had been clear. The property was vacant. Had been for 2 years since old man Pritchard died without kin. Jake had paid good money for that deed, money he'd saved from 5 years of cattle driving and one lucky poker game in Dodge City. But vacant houses don't have fires burning in their hearths. Jake's hand moved to the revolver at his hip as he dismounted, keeping his eyes on the weathered cabin. The place sat in a small valley, with pine trees climbing the slopes on 3 sides. A creek ran behind it, and the land was good. That's why he'd wanted it. That's why he'd paid $300 for it. The front door was shut tight, but he could see fresh boot prints in the mud near the porch. Big prints. A man's prints. The curtains in the window twitched just slightly, and Jake's jaw tightened. He was 20 feet from the porch when the door swung open. The man who stepped out was tall and broad, with a thick black beard and cold eyes. He held a rifle, not aimed at Jake, but ready. 2 more men appeared behind him, both armed. "You're on private property," the bearded man said, his voice low and steady. Jake kept his hand near his gun but didn't draw. Private property? That's funny. "I own this land. Got the deed right here." He patted his jacket pocket. The bearded man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Deed don't mean nothing out here, friend. We've been working this claim for 6 months. Found color in that creek. Good color. Silver. We filed our claim with the territorial office." Jake felt his blood run hot. "This ain't mining land. It's ranch land. I bought it fair." "Then you bought it wrong," one of the other men said, stepping forward. He was younger, maybe 25, with a scar running down his left cheek. "We got papers, too. Legal papers. And we got possession. That's 9/10 of the law, ain't it?" Jake's mind raced. He'd spent everything he had on this land. Everything. His whole future was tied up in that deed. But he was 1 man against 3, and they had the high ground, literally standing on his porch. "I'm going to Santa Fe," Jake said slowly. "I'm going to straighten this out with the land office. But I'll be back. And when I come back, this better be settled legal." The bearded man shrugged. "You do that. But I'm telling you now, we ain't leaving. We've got a good thing here, and we're staying put." Jake mounted his horse, every muscle in his body tense. He wanted to fight, wanted to draw his gun and settle it right there. But that was suicide, and he knew it. As he turned his horse, he heard laughter from the porch. The ride back to Santa Fe would take 2 days. 2 days to figure out what went wrong. 2 days to plan his next move. But as Jake rode away from his stolen home, he made himself a promise. He'd get that land back, whatever it took. The sun was setting behind him when he reached the main trail, painting the sky blood red. It seemed fitting somehow, because Jake had a feeling that before this was done, there'd be blood spilled on his property. His property, no matter what some claim jumpers said. He just had to prove it. The town of Santa Fe was bustling when Jake rode in 2 days later, tired and covered in trail dust. He went straight to the land office, a small building near the plaza with a faded sign that read, "Territorial Land Claims and Deeds." The clerk behind the desk was a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. His name was Martin Cole, and he looked up with mild irritation when Jake burst through the door. "I need to see my property records," Jake said, slapping the deed on the desk. "Someone's squatting on my land, claiming they've got legal rights to mine it." Cole picked up the deed slowly, examined it with care, then set it down. "Name?" "Jake Donovan. I bought the Pritchard property 3 weeks ago." The clerk rose without a word and disappeared into a back room filled with filing cabinets and dusty ledgers. Jake waited, his boot tapping an anxious rhythm on the wooden floor. Through the window, he could see the daily commerce of Santa Fe continuing as normal. Men hauling goods, women shopping, children playing. Nobody else's world was falling apart. Cole returned 15 minutes later with 2 folders. His expression had changed. Now he looked uncomfortable. "We have a problem, Mr. Donovan." Jake's stomach dropped. "What kind of problem? Your deed is legitimate. Purchased from the estate of Walter Pritchard, dated 3 weeks ago." Cole opened the second folder. "But there's also a mining claim filed on the same property dated 2 months ago. Filed by a man named Roy Hackett and his partners. They claim they discovered silver deposits on the creek that runs through the property." "That's impossible," Jake said. "The property was vacant." "The lawyer told me it was vacant." Cole removed his spectacles and cleaned them slowly. "The property was vacant as residential land. But mineral rights are different. In the territory, if someone discovers valuable minerals on unclaimed land, they can file a mining claim. It appears that Mr. Hackett filed his claim before you purchased the property. But I own the land, Jake insisted. I bought it. You own the surface rights, Cole corrected. The question is whether the mineral rights were included in your purchase, and whether Hackett's claim was filed properly. That's going to require a judge to sort out. Jake leaned on the desk. How long?
Could be weeks, could be months.
The circuit judge won't be through here again until next month at the earliest. And in the meantime, those men just get to stay on my property? Get to dig up my land and take whatever silver they find? Cole put his spectacles back on. Technically, if their claim is valid, they have the legal right to work it. But if your deed supersedes their claim, then they're trespassing. He paused. This is why I hate these cases. Somebody always ends up unhappy, often somebody ends up dead. I'm not planning on killing anyone. I just want what's mine. Then you'll need a lawyer. A good one. I can recommend Daniel Foster. He handles land disputes, offices 2 streets over above the general store. Jake took the address and left, his mind churning. A lawyer meant more money, money he didn't have. The judge wouldn't arrive for a month, and every day those men stayed on his property, they were pulling silver out of his creek. His silver. His future. By the time he reached Foster's office, Jake had made a decision. He'd hire the lawyer, but he wouldn't wait for the judge. He'd go back to the property and watch those men. Learn their routine. Find their weakness. Because if the law was going to take months, he'd have to take matters into his own hands. Daniel Foster was younger than Jake expected, maybe 30, with sandy hair and sharp eyes. He listened to Jake's story without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a piece of paper. You've been cheated, Foster said when Jake finished. Question is by who? The men on your property might be legitimate prospectors who didn't know the land had been sold.
Or they might be con men who saw an opportunity. Either way, you're in a bad spot.
Can you help me? Jake asked. I can try. My fee is $50 up front, plus expenses. If we win and recover damages, I take 20% of whatever we get. Jake counted out the money slowly, watching his remaining savings shrink to almost nothing. Foster took it and wrote out a receipt. Here's what I'll do, the lawyer said. I'll file an emergency petition with the territorial court, requesting an injunction to stop any mining activity until the ownership question is resolved. I'll also request that the sheriff investigate the claim. With luck, we can get them off your property within a week or 2. And without luck? Foster met his eyes. Without luck, this drags on for months, they pull out all the silver, and by the time you win the case, there's nothing left to win. Jake stood. Then I guess we better get lucky. He left the lawyer's office and headed for the mercantile. He bought supplies, flour, beans, coffee, ammunition, enough for 2 weeks. Then he bought something else. A spyglass, used but functional. The kind sailors used at sea. The clerk gave him a curious look. Planning to do some scouting? Something like that, Jake said. That night, Jake camped outside of town, trying to plan his next move. He couldn't just walk back onto his property. Those 3 men would shoot him on sight, claim he was trespassing.
But he could watch them, learn their habits.
See how much silver they were really pulling out of that creek. And if he found proof they were lying about their claim, he'd have leverage. Jake reached his property on the 3rd day, approaching from the ridge on the east side. He found a spot in the rocks about 300 yards from the cabin, a place with good cover and a clear view. Through the spyglass, he could see the cabin, the creek, and most of the surrounding area. The 3 men were working. The bearded one, Roy Hackett, presumably, was directing operations. The younger man with the scar was doing most of the labor, shoveling gravel from the creek into a sluice box. The 3rd man, older and quieter, was panning downstream, checking for color. They were serious about it. This wasn't a sham operation. They really were mining. Jake watched for 3 days, taking careful notes. They worked from dawn until dark, breaking only for meals. At night, 2 would sleep while 1 kept watch. They had a routine, disciplined and professional. These weren't random drifters. They were experienced miners. On the 4th day, something changed. A wagon arrived, driven by a fat man in an expensive suit. Jake focused the spyglass on him, trying to make out details. The man climbed down from the wagon, spoke with Hackett for several minutes. Then Hackett brought out a leather pouch. The fat man examined the contents, nodded, and handed over an envelope. Money, had to be. So they were selling the silver. Selling silver from Jake's land. The fat man left, and Jake made a decision. He'd follow that wagon, see where it led. Maybe the buyer knew something. Maybe he was part of the scheme. Jake waited until the wagon was a mile down the trail, then followed on horseback, keeping his distance. The fat man drove slowly, in no particular hurry. By evening, they'd reached a small mining town called Copper Ridge, about 15 miles from Jake's property. The fat man pulled up in front of a building with a sign that read Copper Ridge Assay Office and Bank, proprietor Victor Lang. Jake watched from across the street as the fat man went inside. 30 minutes later, he emerged, got back in his wagon, and drove to a nearby hotel. Jake waited until dark, then approached the assay office. The door was locked, but there was a light in the back room. Through a gap in the curtain, Jake could see a man working at a desk, weighing something on a scale. Victor Lang, presumably. Jake knocked on the back door. The man inside started, then came to the door. "We're closed," he called through the wood. "I need to talk to you about Roy Hackett," Jake said. The door opened a crack. Lang peered out, suspicious. "What about him? I need to know if his silver claim is legitimate." Lang studied Jake for a long moment, then opened the door wider. "You better come in. But if you're planning trouble, I should tell you I keep a shotgun under the counter." "No trouble," Jake said. "Just information." Inside, the office smelled of chemicals and metal. Lang was a big man, gone soft around the middle, with shrewd eyes and careful hands. He gestured to a chair. "You're the one who bought the Pritchard place," Lang said. "It wasn't a question," Jake nodded. "How'd you know?" "Hackett mentioned it. Said some fool bought the land out from under him." "No offense." "None taken." "So his claim is real?" Lang sat behind his desk. "Real enough. He's been bringing me samples for 3 months. Good silver. Not rich, but steady. He's probably pulled out maybe $500 worth so far." Jake felt sick. $500, more than he'd paid for the land. "But here's the thing," Lang continued. "I've been buying ore in this territory for 15 years. I know every major claim, every significant strike. That property of yours, it was never known for silver. Walter Pritchard worked it as a ranch for 30 years and never found color. Then he dies, and suddenly there's silver." "You think it's planted?" Jake asked. "I think it's possible. I think maybe Roy Hackett salted that creek just enough to file a legitimate claim. Once he's got the claim, he can work the land legally, and who's going to prove the silver wasn't there naturally? But that's just speculation. I have no proof." "Why would he do that? Why not just buy the land himself?" Lang smiled thinly. "Because the land was tied up in probate for 2 years. By the time it was available for purchase, Hackett didn't have the money. But he'd already started working it, thinking it was abandoned. Then you came along and bought it before he could scrape together the funds. So he filed a mining claim to protect his investment. That's fraud," Jake said. "Maybe. But proving it?" Lang shook his head. "That's another matter. You'd need to prove the silver was planted. You'd need evidence that Hackett knew the land was going to be sold. You'd need to show intent. Good luck with that." Jake stood. "Thanks for the information. Word of advice?" Lang said. "Be careful. Roy Hackett isn't a man to cross." "He's killed before. Montana, I heard." "A claim dispute that went bad. He spent 2 years in prison for it. Got out, came here, kept his head down. But he's got a mean streak. You push him, he'll push back harder." Jake left the assay office with more questions than answers. If Hackett had salted the claim, he'd been smart about it. Just enough silver to make it look real, not so much that it seemed suspicious. And now he had possession, which gave him the advantage. But Jake had one thing Hackett didn't expect: patience and determination. He'd find a way to prove the fraud. He'd get his land back, even if it killed him. Jake spent the next week watching Hackett's operation, documenting everything. He noted the times they worked, the equipment they used, the visitors who came and went. He took samples from the creek upstream, beyond where they were mining, looking for any trace of silver. He found none. That didn't prove anything, but it added to his suspicions. On the 8th day, Jake's luck changed. He was watching through the spyglass when a 4th man arrived. Older, grizzled, with the look of a long-time prospector. He and Hackett argued. Jake couldn't hear the words, but the body language was clear. The old man was angry. He pointed toward the creek, then toward the cabin, gesticulating wildly. Hackett remained calm, but his hand stayed near his gun. The argument lasted 20 minutes. The old man stormed off, heading down the trail on foot. Jake made a quick decision. He circled through the woods and intercepted the man half a mile from the cabin. "Hold up," Jake called out, stepping into view with his hands raised. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to talk." The old man spun, reaching for a pistol at his belt, but he didn't draw when he saw Jake's hands were empty. "Who are you?" the old man demanded. "My name's Jake Donovan. I own this land. Or I thought I did, until Roy Hackett showed up with a mining claim." The old man's expression changed. "You're the one." "Hackett mentioned you. What were you arguing about?" The old man spat on the ground. "I'm Pete Marsh. I worked for Hackett for 3 months, helping him set up that claim. He promised me a 10% share of whatever we pulled out. Now he's trying to cut me out, saying I was just hired labor, not a partner." "Were you there when he found the silver?" Jake asked. Pete's eyes narrowed. "I was there when he put it in the creek." Jake's heart raced. "He salted the claim?" "Damn right he did. Bought raw silver in Copper Ridge, crushed it up, scattered it in the creek bed, made it look natural. Then filed his claim. I helped him do it, so I guess I'm guilty too. But I figured we were just securing rights to land that would have gone to waste otherwise. I didn't know someone else was going to buy it." "Will you testify to that?" Jake asked. Pete laughed bitterly.
And get myself arrested? No thanks.
"What if I could guarantee you immunity? What if I could make sure you don't get charged with fraud?" "How you gonna do that? I've got a lawyer in Santa Fe." "If you testify that Hackett salted the claim, my lawyer can work out a deal with the territorial prosecutor. You cooperate, you walk free." Pete considered this for a long moment. "And what do I get out of it?" "Your conscience clear, and maybe $100 for your trouble. Make it 200. Jake didn't have $200. He barely had 50 left. But he nodded anyway. 200, but only if your testimony holds up in court." Pete extended his hand. "Deal. But we better move fast. Hackett's planning to pull out in 2 weeks. He's got almost all the silver he planted extracted. Once he's gone, you'll never find him." Jake shook his hand. "Then we better get to Santa Fe. Today." They rode hard, reaching Santa Fe by nightfall. Daniel Foster was still in his office, working by lamplight. Jake burst in with Pete following. "I've got a witness," Jake said. "He'll testify that Hackett salted the claim." Foster looked at Pete, then at Jake. "This better not be a trick." "No trick," Pete said. "I'll tell the truth, but I want immunity and I want money." Foster nodded slowly. "I'll need to talk to the prosecutor. It'll take a day, maybe 2. You both better stay in town." Jake and Pete found a cheap boarding house and waited. 2 days felt like 2 years. Finally, Foster sent word. The prosecutor would grant Pete immunity in exchange for his testimony. The territorial marshal would issue a warrant for Hackett's arrest. "We're going to win this," Foster said. "With Pete's testimony, we can prove fraud. The court will void Hackett's claim and uphold your deed." "When?" Jake asked. "The marshal is assembling a posse. They'll ride out tomorrow to arrest Hackett and his men. You can go with them if you want." Jake wanted. He wanted to see Hackett's face when the law came down on him. Wanted to watch them haul him away in chains. The posse consisted of 6 men, the marshal whose name was Tom Brady, 3 deputies, Jake, and a federal agent who'd been investigating mining fraud in the territory. They left Santa Fe at dawn and reached Jake's property by mid-afternoon. The cabin looked quiet. Smoke still rose from the chimney. The sluice box sat beside the creek, abandoned. Marshal Brady approached carefully, his hand on his gun. "Roy Hackett," he called out. "This is Marshal Tom Brady. I've got a warrant for your arrest. Come out with your hands up." "Nothing." Brady tried again. "Hackett, don't make this harder than it needs to be." The cabin door opened slowly. But it wasn't Hackett who stepped out. It was the younger man, the one with the scar. His hands were red with blood. "He's dead," the young man said, his voice hollow. "They're both dead." Jake pushed forward, ignoring Brady's restraining hand. He ran to the cabin and looked inside. Roy Hackett lay on the floor, a knife wound in his chest. The third man, the older quiet one, sat slumped against the wall, shot through the head. Blood covered the floor. "What happened?" Brady demanded, grabbing the young man by the arm. "Hackett found out about Pete," the young man said. "Found out he'd gone to testify. He went crazy, started accusing us of being traitors, too. He pulled a knife on Billy, so Billy shot him. Then Billy turned the gun on himself, said he couldn't go to prison. Said he'd rather die." Brady looked at Jake. "Looks like your problem solved itself." But Jake didn't feel victorious. He felt sick. 2 men were dead. His property was covered in blood. The silver had been a lie, but the violence had been real. "What's your name?" Brady asked the young man. "Carl Webb." "I swear, I was outside when it happened." "I heard the shot, came running, found them both dead." Brady nodded. "You're coming with us anyway. We'll sort this out in Santa Fe." They wrapped the bodies in canvas and loaded them onto horses. Jake stood in front of his cabin now, and felt empty. He'd won. The land was his again. But the victory tasted like ashes. That night, alone in his cabin, Jake cleaned the blood from the floor. He worked until his hands were raw and the water bucket was red, but he couldn't wash away what had happened. Couldn't erase the memory of 2 dead men lying on his floor. He'd wanted his land back. He'd gotten it, but the cost had been higher than he'd ever imagined. 3 weeks later, the territorial judge ruled in Jake's favor. The mining claim was voided, the deed confirmed. Jake Donovan was the legal owner of the Pritchard property, with all rights and privileges thereof. Carl Webb was released without charges after Pete's testimony confirmed his story. Pete collected his $200 and disappeared. Daniel Foster sent Jake a bill for his services, which Jake paid with the last of his money, and Jake was left alone on his land, broke, haunted, and wondering if it had all been worth it. The cabin felt different now. Jake couldn't explain it, but the place had changed. He'd cleaned the blood, scrubbed the floors, even burned the bedding where Hackett had died, but the ghosts remained. Some nights he'd wake from dreams of blood and screaming. Other nights he couldn't sleep at all, lying awake and listening to every creak of the timbers, every whisper of wind through the pines. He tried to work the land, to turn it into the ranch he'd dreamed of. He spent his days clearing brush, repairing fences, planning where he'd build a barn and corrals. The physical labor helped, gave him something to focus on besides the memories. But money was running out fast, and winter was coming. A month after the judge's ruling, Jake rode into Copper Ridge to buy supplies. He was loading sacks of feed onto his horse when a woman approached him. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair and determined eyes. She wore practical clothes, trousers, and a man's shirt, and carried herself like someone used to hard work. "You're Jake Donovan," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am. I'm Kate Brennan. My brother was Billy, the man who died in your cabin." Jake felt his stomach tighten. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Are you?" Kate's eyes were hard. "From what I heard, you got what you wanted. Your land back. My brother dead." "I never wanted anyone to die," Jake said quietly. "I just wanted what was mine." Kate studied him for a long moment. Billy wasn't a bad man. He made mistakes, got involved with the wrong people, but he didn't deserve to die. No, he didn't. Roy Hackett destroyed him. Got him involved in that fraud scheme, promised him easy money. Billy was desperate. Our parents died last year, left us with nothing but debts. He was trying to help us survive. Jake didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't bring him back." Kate turned to leave, then stopped. "I'm heading to California. Going to start over. But I wanted to see you first. Wanted to see if you were worth my brother's life." "Am I?" Kate looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression softened slightly. "I don't know yet. Maybe someday you'll do something that makes it mean something. Maybe you'll use that land for good, help people instead of hurting them. That's what I hope anyway." She walked away, leaving Jake standing in the street with a weight on his chest heavier than any sack of feed. That night, back in the cabin, Jake made a decision. Kate was right. If Billy's death was going to mean anything, Jake had to make this land count for something more than just his own survival. He didn't know what that meant yet, but he'd figure it out. He started small. There was a family living 10 miles down the trail, homesteaders named the Callahans. They had 6 kids and were struggling to get through the winter. Jake rode over with half his supplies and left them on the porch with a note saying they were from a friend. He helped a neighboring rancher round up strays after a storm. He shared his tools with anyone who needed them. He started building a reputation, slowly, as someone reliable, someone you could count on. Winter came hard that year. Snow piled high in the valley, and temperatures dropped below 0. Jake spent long days chopping wood, feeding his horse, melting snow for water. He was lonely, isolated, with too much time to think. But he kept busy, kept working, kept trying to be worthy of the second chance he'd been given. In February, a blizzard hit. Jake was hunkered down in the cabin, watching the snow pile against the windows when he heard a sound. Faint, almost lost in the howl of the wind, but unmistakable. Someone shouting for help. Jake grabbed his coat and rifle and pushed out into the storm. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath. He could barely see 10 feet in front of him, but he followed the sound, stumbling through waist-deep snow. He found them near the creek. A man and a boy, maybe 12 years old, huddled against a fallen tree. The man's leg was twisted at a bad angle, clearly broken. The boy was crying, his lips blue with cold. "Help us!" the man gasped. "Please!" Jake didn't hesitate. He got them up, half carrying the man, guiding the boy. The cabin was only 100 yards away, but it felt like a mile. By the time they reached the door, Jake's muscles were screaming and his lungs burned from the cold air. Inside, he got them by the fire, stripped off their wet clothes, wrapped them in blankets. The man's name was George Miller. The boy was his son, Sam. They'd been traveling from Colorado to California, got caught in the storm, lost their way. "We thought we were going to die," George said, his teeth chattering. "Then we saw your chimney smoke." Jake set the man's leg as best he could, using splints and bandages from his medical kit. It was rough work, but it would hold until they could get to a doctor. The boy recovered quickly by the fire, his color returning. But George was in bad shape. The broken leg, the cold, the exhaustion. He needed rest and care. They stayed for a week, until the storm passed and George was strong enough to travel. During that time, Jake learned their story. George's wife had died of fever the previous summer. He'd lost his farm to the bank. He was taking Sam west to start over, to find work in the goldfields or the logging camps, anything to give his boy a future. "You saved our lives," George said when they were preparing to leave. "I'll never forget that." "Just pass it on," Jake said. "Help someone else when you get the chance." After they left, the cabin felt even emptier than before, but something had changed. Jake felt it in his bones. For the first time since buying the property, since the whole mess with Hackett and the blood and the death, Jake felt like maybe he was on the right path. Maybe the land was becoming what it was meant to be, not just a piece of property, but a place where people could find help. Find hope. Spring came slowly, melting the snow and revealing the land beneath. Jake planted a garden, fixed up the fences, built a small barn. He bought a few head of cattle with money he borrowed from the bank in Copper Ridge, promising to pay it back after the fall sale. The work was hard, but it felt good, honest, clean. One afternoon in May, Jake was working on the barn roof when he saw a rider approaching. He climbed down, wiping sweat from his face, and watched as the rider drew near. It was Kate Brennan. She looked different, healthier somehow. Less haunted. She dismounted and stood facing him, a small smile on her face. "I thought I was going to California," she said. "What happened?" "Got as far as Nevada and realized I was running from the wrong things. So I came back." Jake nodded. "What are you going to do now? I heard you helped the Callahans through the winter. Heard you saved George Miller and his boy during the blizzard. Heard you're trying to build something good here. I thought maybe I could help." "I don't have money to pay a hand," Jake said. "I can barely feed myself. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for a chance to be part of something that matters. Billy's gone. I can't change that. But maybe I can help make sure his death leads to something better." Jake looked at her, saw the determination in her eyes, the strength in her stance. He thought about the empty cabin, the lonely nights, the weight of doing everything alone. "I could use the help," he admitted, "but it's going to be hard work. Long hours. No guarantee we'll make it." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Kate said, "and I've learned that guarantees are overrated." Jake extended his hand. "Partners?" Kate shook it firmly. "Partners!" Over the next months, they worked side by side, transforming the property. Kate proved to be as tough and capable as any man Jake had known. She could rope and ride, fix fences and tend cattle, but more than that, she brought something Jake had lost. Hope. Purpose. A reason to believe that the future could be better than the past. They talked while they worked, sharing stories. Kate told him about growing up with Billy, about their parents, about the dreams she'd had before everything fell apart. Jake told her about his years on the cattle drives, about the poker game in Dodge City that had given him the stake to buy the land, about the crushing disappointment of finding squatters in his cabin. "Do you ever wish you'd never bought this place?" Kate asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Jake thought about it. "Sometimes. But then I think about George and Sam, about the Callahans, about all the people we might help in the future, and I realize that maybe this was supposed to happen. Maybe I needed to go through all that to understand what this land is really for." "What's it for?" Kate asked. "I don't know exactly, but I think it's more than just a ranch. I think it could be a place where people can find a second chance. a place where someone who's lost can find their way again. Kate was quiet for a moment. Like me? Like both of us, Jake said. As summer turned to fall, the cattle thrived and the garden produced well. Jake and Kate worked from dawn to dusk, building not just a ranch, but a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. There was an easiness between them, a comfort that went beyond friendship but hadn't yet become something more. In September, they drove their small herd to market in Copper Ridge. The prices were fair, and Jake made enough to pay back his loan with a little left over. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a start. On the ride back, with the money safely in his saddlebag, Jake felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Not in himself necessarily, but in what they'd built together. "We did it," he said to Kate as they rode through the valley toward home. "We did," Kate agreed. "But this is just the beginning." She was right. That winter, 3 more families showed up at their door, lost or in trouble. Each time Jake and Kate took them in, shared what they had, helped them get back on their feet, word spread that the Pritchard place, now known as the Donovan Ranch, was a safe haven, a place where you could find help without judgment. By the following spring, Jake had a reputation throughout the territory, not as a gunfighter or a troublemaker, but as a man who'd taken something broken and made it whole, a man who'd turned tragedy into purpose. One evening in April, as Jake and Kate sat on the porch after a long day's work, she reached over and took his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. "I'm glad I came back," she said softly. "So am I," Jake said. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over their valley. The land that had cost so much, brought so much pain, had become something neither of them had expected. A home. A sanctuary. A place of second chances. The smoke still rose from the chimney, just as it had that first day when Jake had ridden up expecting to find his property vacant. But now the smoke meant something different. It meant warmth, safety, welcome. It meant that someone was home, and that home was open to anyone who needed it. Jake looked at the deed, framed now and hanging on the cabin wall. It said vacant, but it had been wrong from the start. The land had never been vacant. It had just been waiting. Waiting for someone to understand what it was really meant for. And now, finally, it had found its purpose.